There has been a destabilization of people's belief in normalcy. Everything has become fragmented. Everything is weaponized. All media, all information, all channels, all the time. Welcome to fifth generation warfare deployed for political purposes.
You've said, quote, what we've experienced during the COVID crisis is full-on fifth generation modern political and information warfare.
In early February, at a time when the White House officially doesn't even recognize that the virus is a threat, there has been meetings between the WHO and the White House and Amazon and Google and Facebook and the major players in talking about how to control the spread of disinformation and misinformation relating to the virus and vaccines, which all appears to have been basically pre-cooked. The entities, whoever they are, these shadowy figures who have been leading these efforts to promote a false narrative. If you are selfish and don't take the vaccine, you're going to put others at risk, and you're going to put the elderly at risk and the high-risk populations, and you're being selfish. All of this messaging that we got was pre-tested. The weaponization of fear against decision-making politicians that put them in a position where you will agree to our terms and conditions, Mr. Politician.
It's like a clinical trial for psyops.
In a world in which the government and the military is able to profoundly influence what you think, believe, hear, sense, the emotions that you feel, personal sovereignty is an obsolete notion. I think that we do face a singularity, and I think it's a choice. And it's between this dark future versus a world that I think exists on the horizon. What we can do is live courageously, and if we stop allowing them to intimidate us, we can probably take back our sovereignty a little bit.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Robert Malone, the internationally renowned virologist, immunologist, physician, biochemist, and author. You are credited as the original inventor of mRNA delivery and vaccination as a technology, and have spent much of the last 40 years working on vaccine development with extensive experience in drug repurposing for infectious disease outbreaks. You have submitted almost 100 scientific peer-reviewed publications and been invited as a speaker at over 100 conferences. But more recently, you've been subjected to censorship and defamation because you have criticized the US government for its methods and standards of bringing vaccines to market in a safe and effective manner. Robert, you ultimately believe we must demand transparency from our governments and big pharma, and that no person with facts or evidence should be denied the right to challenge, debate, or protest. This is our second conversation, and I'm glad we could do this one in person and live, or for as long as they let it stream on the big tech platforms we're currently using. Because of the threat of censorship, can everyone please watching this share this current link to all of your contacts, social media channels, Telegram, Signal groups, etc. if it gets taken down. And of course, the full unedited and uncensored episode will always be available at londonreal.tv/Malone. Robert, welcome back to London Real.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for the opportunity to be here in this beautiful new studio.
It's so good to have you here in person, and it's great to have you inaugurate this new studio. I want to jump right into it because I saw a quote from you recently, and maybe it'll just drop us right in to so many of the narratives that you're a part of these days that are so important. And this is a quote from you. You've said, quote, "What we've experienced during the COVID crisis is full-on, fifth-generation, modern political and information warfare, which consists of effectively using social and mainstream media to control the narrative. But this is asymmetric warfare. The practitioners have the resources, the power, the money, mainstream media, big pharma, tech giants, and social media supporting their efforts." You go on to say there's a small but growing guerrilla army of supporters of freedom, but if this informal freedom resistance campaign speaks too loudly or speaks truth to power too often, they are taken out by warnings and deplatforming. They're losing their right to free speech on a daily basis. We've even seen some politicians no longer allowed to use Twitter, YouTube, etc. Robert, tell me about this current state we find ourselves in early 2023. Describe this, and how does this affect everything in our environment, from vaccines to the transgender issue to just everything going on in the world?
To Nord Stream.
To Nord Stream pipeline.
Yeah. It's everything. Now the latest here in the States is, are they weather balloons or are they UFOs? And the White House is being completely non-transparent about that, which of course is creating a field day for all those that are conspiracy-minded. I think in a way, a strong case could be made, whether it's intentional or unintentional. There has been a destabilization of people's belief in normalcy. Everything has become fragmented. Everything is weaponized. All media, all information, all channels, all the time is weaponized for political purposes. The New York Times themselves said that the CDC has become a political arm of the White House. You know, the CDC is supposed to be and this is the New York Times last February. The CDC is supposed to be an independent arbiter of truth for medical practitioners and public health officials, but it's all weaponized. It's profound, and what the consequence is that fraction of the population that's paying attention is left in a state of not trusting or believing anything. The whole information landscape has become this fluid, shifting terrain. But that is fifth generation warfare, and you can't identify, as is typical in this extreme spectrum of propaganda, as warfare, which we call fifth gen warfare, but it's really a spectrum, continuum with kinetic warfare, but just taken to extreme, where the battleground is your mind and your thoughts and your beliefs and your emotions that are all manipulated in so many different ways. But this is military grade information weaponry that's been deployed. And how do we know that that's the case? Because we see a small trickling of press reports from literally almost all of the nations of the Five Eyes Alliance, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States, and Great Britain. And in particular, Great Britain and Canada have gradually trickled out information about the role of the military over the last 3 years in deploying these technologies. I think you have here in the UK the 77th Brigade, I think is what I've heard, and that includes a member of Parliament and many others that are skilled at PSYOPs, at military grade PSYOPs, that has been used. We also have the nudge unit, for which there was some press coverage of an apology here in the UK. There's multiple stories, both in Australia and in the Canadian press. There was some Freedom of Information Act reveals in the Canadian press over the direct role of their military in propagating this. And it leaves people that are paying attention in a state of constant unease and disconnectedness and apprehension, this chronic anxiety, which, by the way, is exactly what Matthias Desmet, my friend, who wrote this book on totalitarianism from the University of Ghent in Belgium, that came up with this term mass formation, or some have referred to it as mass formation psychosis, this hypnosis that has happened in the population where they have basically coalesced around fear objects. And what we've now learned is many of those fear objects were actively promoted. We even have Mr. Gates now talking about that the threat of the virus was overstated, and hence the response to the virus was an overreaction. This is gradually coming out, but you ask about the current state. What I see is, I think I see, it's in this battlefield environment, psychological information battlefield environment, it's really hard to really discern truth and reality because it's so fluid and there's so many actors actively trying to manipulate it. But my sense is that there is a reinvigoration of a lot of these efforts currently in progress. And one interpretation of that, one hypothesis, I think is a way to phrase the term. It sounds very sciencey, and I'm not meaning it that way. I'm trying to say, I don't know this to be true. It appears that this might be one of the things that's going on. So a hypothesis is that the entities, whoever they are, these shadowy figures who have been leading these efforts to promote a false narrative about the nature of the virus, the nature of the disease, the safety and efficacy of the vaccines, the safety and efficacy of the new drug products like remdesivir, they seem to be doubling down as there is this kind of gradual trickling out reveal that's happening right now with both clinical data and FOIA information, the Twitter files, the information that's being revealed by the attorneys general, this Fauci paper that recently came out, which he says he is not saying that the vaccines don't work, even though he appears to be saying that the vaccines don't work. So there was some damage control put out after the paper was published. It seems like the information, as they say, information wants to be free. It's coming out. And now they have to redouble their efforts to try to keep a lid on this, presumably because if people become aware of what has been done to them, they will be rightfully upset. In theory, one would think an electorate would retaliate against the political bosses that have given rise to this. I don't know that that's true anymore. It could well be that they can manipulate information, virtually manipulate reality to such an extent that people stay kind of asleep. So that's what I'm seeing is a really ramping up recently over the last couple of months. And the most egregious example of that is the Project Veritas Pfizer response, which was just amazing to watch. The full power of a multi-trillion-dollar company to memory hole, wipe the internet, completely control corporate media, and bury a story that is a huge story but can't be told. Just the same as I mentioned a moment ago, the Nord Stream bombing is another story that is not allowed to be told, despite what Cy Hirsch has tried to publish.
So if we go into that Veritas piece, maybe it's the perfect example to illustrate your point. Maybe something that couldn't have even been done a couple of years ago because maybe they weren't prepared, but we saw a video come out where Project Veritas, got that Pfizer executive to confess some things that they're doing behind the scenes. That video temporarily escaped via Twitter, but then very quickly, as you mentioned on our last episode, all mentions of the executive himself was wiped off something known as the Wayback Machine, which is a way of chronicling everything that's ever been written on the internet, something that I thought was like the Bible. It couldn't be unwritten or rewritten. But you were saying they were able to wipe that and also start to wipe all other references around that. Maybe you can describe a little bit more, because I think it's a poignant example of exactly what you're talking about, manipulating information.
So and then of course for the viewers here in the UK that may not be familiar with the latest in that saga, the board of directors of Project Veritas is trying to run James O'Keefe, the director who virtually is Project Veritas embodied, trying to run him out of the company. So that's just the latest in this saga.
For doing that?
No.
Who knows?
There is various soft excuses about employee harassment or other claims, things that are very difficult to verify. So kind of a cloud of suspicion has been built around him, none of which really has anything particularly tangible.
Right. An information warfare tool is what that is. Right.
And amazingly, it's coming from his own board of directors. So there's a lesson in that. Anybody who's an entrepreneur, select your board of directors very carefully. I think, how many times do we have to learn that lesson? Especially in nonprofits, people seem to forget that. So the story, I'm just back from London, and I get a call. Dr. Malone, would you review this video that we have embargoed from Project Veritas? And so I click on the link, view the video, and I'm scheduled for a Zoom hit like as soon as I can finish watching the video. So I'm really coming hot off of that, and they capture my reactions to it, and then they cut that in at the back end and throughout the video, where I'm basically expressing shock and awe at the tone of the young executive, more as in the content of what he's saying, which is largely forward-looking. He's disclosing in that particular cut, and it turns out they have more footage that they subsequently released. In that particular cut, he talks about Pfizer, in his position, is that of a worldwide director level. So it's pretty high. He's like 3 down from the CEO, and worldwide director of mRNA strategies, I think is the short version of his title. It comes out that he was in a urology residency about 2 years in, and he dropped out of his residency and then got this position. He has no prior experience in immunology, vaccinology, molecular virology, molecular biology. He's just slotted into this position, which is kind of fascinating in and of itself. And I assert that this represents an ESG hire, most likely. That's my hypothesis, is he was put in that position to meet certain corporate criteria for hiring of different categories, protected categories. In any case, so the gentleman speaks about gain-of-function research and denies that Pfizer is performing, and he's quite wry about it, denies that Pfizer is performing gain-of-function research rather that they're performing directed evolution. Now, in a subsequent essay, I took the time to look up what the U.S. government's definition is of gain-of-function research, and it is pretty much precisely what this gentleman is asserting Pfizer is performing, and it's just a euphemism to rename it directed evolution, which really has a different meaning than the way he's using it. So this comes out, and the focus in that particular segment and the outrage is around Pfizer, this senior Pfizer executive essentially acknowledging that Pfizer is engineering viruses, and there's a prior story in Stat News, which is a Boston-based outlet that focuses mostly on the pharmaceutical industry, among other things, and health and in general, but very much a Boston-based, really kind of an advocacy outlet for pharma. And so they had done a puff piece on Pfizer and the Pearl River, New York facilities, in which they explicitly described exactly what the gentleman was saying was going on, and and talked about their collaborator at University of Texas and a Chinese gentleman that was actually performing this directed evolution or gain of function research on their behalf, et cetera. So everything in retrospect, everything the gentleman said was really already covered in another puff piece that Stat News had put out, but nobody had paid any attention to. And then when it came out with kind of the outrageous spin of this gentleman's very casual, kind of narcissistic approach to this, under the rubric of Project Veritas, suddenly there's a bunch of outrage over it. And that triggers a cascade of events that are an amazing case study in the ability of a major corporation to control information. I think it's your Daily Mail puts out an article covering it and then almost immediately takes it down. Then this process begins. The usual internet denizens go about and capture screenshots of the Pfizer executive's LinkedIn profile and his college profile from his university, Baylor, as I recall, and various snapshots of him during medical school and things that are on the web, as well as snapshots of his bio that's put out by Pfizer, describing him and his background. And then within about 4 hours, all of that is gone. And then there's a wave of bots and trolls that come online on Twitter and other vehicles that are promoting the logic that the gentleman doesn't even exist, that this was a deep fake video, and he's not a Pfizer executive, and there's a whole lot of confusion around that. About the same time, Project Veritas launches a Twitter Spaces, which is this new tool that Twitter has set up for audio online community meeting. There's no video component to it, which is turning out to be quite effective. And I forget, there was like 20,000 plus people that tuned into that. And during that, another Pfizer whistleblower apparently sent James O'Keefe personally a organizational chart of Pfizer vaccines that clearly documented that, in fact, this person was who he said he was, and he held that position, et cetera. And that kind of started to tamp down the controversy. Then what was amazing was the only corporate media outlet that covered this at all was Tucker Carlson did a hit. And what had happened was that when I got this alert from Veritas, I have Tucker's cell phone number. I don't bother him much, and I don't give it out, so don't ask. But I alerted him. I said, I've seen this embargoed video from Veritas, and you probably want to have your staff pay attention to this because I think it's going to be a big deal. And so he gets me on the following evening after this has all transpired, this long Twitter Spaces conversation, et cetera, and covers this really fairly deeply, including a little bit about the censorship that happens. And then in the morning segments at Fox News, they cut out all of that stuff that Tucker covered, and they just have some clips of me talking about it, and that's all the coverage that happens. So it's totally deep-sixed. And then, as you mentioned, fascinating. The Wayback Machine, which is, as you say, this historically an internet archive, but there have been press releases and publications to the effect that the Wayback Machine has executed an agreement with the U.S. government and Homeland Security, as I recall, that they will delete sensitive information historically upon request. So whoever that request was, this information about this young physician with this senior position at Pfizer gets scrubbed off of the Wayback Machine as if he'd never existed at all. And this was done previously just to illustrate the point. In the case of the Hunter Biden laptop story that the New York Post put out, in all of that information that came out around the context of the election, was also scrubbed from the Wayback Machine. And then when it became generally acknowledged that including by Hunter Biden and his attorney, that the laptop was real as part of his recent defense strategy, then the Wayback Machine was caught repopulating those stories back in, so repatriating the prior censorship. And all in all, it has been, and now the story's gone. Nobody's talking about it. There's no further coverage at all. And we're all, talking about spy balloons and UFOs, yet another distraction.
Right, on to the next. And that's what you said. They're using just any event now, and they're using it in an information warfare perspective. So there's a balloon in the sky. Great. How can we weaponize that and use it as a distraction from previous news, or use it to just push our own agenda, or just dial up the anxiety, confuse? It's chestnut checkers as well, right? So they can play
the other thing I forgot to say was Pfizer went silent after they did this. They seem to have taken the strategy of, another thing they did was they blocked all comments on any Pfizer site unless you were somebody that Pfizer was following. So nobody could write anything on any of the Pfizer sites. And they went dark. They said nothing. And then on 8 p.m. on Friday, they dropped this statement from their PR office, presumably with their attorneys involved, in which they made a series of statements that basically were confirmatory that in fact they are doing directed evolution and gain of function research, but without really admitting it that it's the case. I mean, it was a classic, carefully worded statement. In the classic strategy here in London, I'm sure you understand about how to manipulate the street. And one thing that you want to do if you don't want to take a big stock hit is you do the drop on Friday night, preferably before a 3-day weekend, so that the street has plenty of time to process that information. And when the opening bell hits, it's yesterday's news.
Right. So there was that timing issue as well. I want to go a little deeper because this is important. In your book, you talk about this concept of nudging. And you say, quote, "A nudge is any attempt at influencing people's judgment, choice, or behavior in a predictable way that's motivated because of cognitive boundaries, biases, routines, and habits in individual and social decision-making, posing barriers for people to perform rationality in their own self-declared interests." And you go on in the book to talk about some of the vaccination psyops. And I wanted to mention them because I think they'll really ring true to people, because everybody got one of these messages and it affected the way they behaved during the pandemic and how they decided about that vaccine. I'm just going to list the 10 that you mentioned.
And you're talking about the 10 study groups. This is a Yale University prospective randomized clinical trial testing out different messaging before there was ever a vaccine. And these are the 10 different test messages that were done in a 6-month randomized prospective clinical trial that I argue was probably more rigorous than the actual vaccine trials. So go ahead. Wow.
All right. So number one is the personal freedom message. And I'm going to try to summarize each one quickly, and then you can go deeper on ones. But it's how COVID-19 is limiting people's personal freedom. And by working together, we get enough people vaccinated, society can preserve its personal freedom. That was one. Economic freedom message. Very similar to that, except it's limiting people's economic freedom. By working together, we can preserve that for society. Self-interest message presents a real danger to your own health. Even if one is young and healthy, getting vaccinated is the best way. Community interest message. A message about the dangers of COVID to the health of loved ones. The more people get vaccinated, the better it is for your loved ones. Economic benefit message about how it's wreaking havoc on the economy in general. The only way to strengthen the economy is to work together to get people vaccinated. These are hard to read. Guilt message presents a health to one's own family and community, how guilty you'll feel if you choose not to get vaccinated. Embarrassment message. Best way to protect family and the community is by getting vaccinated. Imagine the embarrassment of not and spreading the disease to someone. Anger message, right? Imagine how angry you'll be if you choose not to get vaccinated and spread to someone you care. Trust in science message. Vaccinated is backed by science. If one doesn't get vaccinated, it means that you don't understand how infections are spread, or you're one who ignores science. And then not bravery message. This is interesting. describes how firefighters, doctors, and frontline medical workers are brave, and those who choose not to get vaccinated are not brave. And explaining how the EMTs and doctors putting themselves on the line are brave, and people that refuse are reckless. And that really gets to those alpha males, doesn't it? Who maybe passed on all the other 9.
Yeah, so they do this. This all presumes that they have a safe and effective vaccine, of course.
Right.
And it's all done prospectively, randomized clinical trial, multiple groups. And by the way, Yale doesn't disclose who the funding agency is. This is a big trial. 600-person trial like this, 6-month follow-up. That's ballpark going to be something like $10,000 per person. Okay, somebody sunk some serious cash into doing this through Yale, and from that was clearly derived a set of approved messages that were then propagated worldwide. They were field tested in a randomized trial to see which ones were most potent. This is what the big bird get jabbed to save granny messaging on CNN is a derivative of this, right? All of this about if you are selfish and don't take the vaccine, you're going to put others at risk, and you're going to put the elderly at risk and the high-risk populations, and you're being selfish. All of this messaging that we got was pre-tested.
It's like a clinical trial for PsyOps.
Yeah, it was absolutely a PsyOps clinical trial run at Yale. Absolutely, unequivocally.
And you're saying just as much thought, if not more, was put in this than the vaccine itself?
In terms of the rigor of the trial, this is a 600-person randomized clinical trial, blinded, multiple groups, prospective, all the bells and whistles, all the stuff you're supposed to have, with a 6-month follow-up. I think the endpoints were personal acceptance and willingness to take the jab, as well as one's willingness to communicate with others or attempt to influence others to go ahead and take the jab. So that's, it can't get any more overt than that, I don't think. We have, the pejorative is that we've been treated like sheep. And I don't know that that's particularly effective to call people sheep if you want to convince them of anything. That pretty much turns them off. But still, that's how our governments have treated us. And I'm afraid that the UK is often at the center of most of this type of PsyOps strategy. And then we have just layers and layers of other activities, such as the Wikipedia editing. That also seem to have an MI5 angle to them. And I mentioned the Five Eyes Alliance, of course, and the reciprocal agreements that exist between these various intelligence agencies so that ostensibly your intelligence community does not act directly against your populace in information gathering. I'm using a euphemism for spying, or other activities, but our CIA can act against your populace. That's totally allowed. But in the United States now, we have a decision by an executive order by this administration that our intelligence community is allowed to spy on Americans. So we've kind of crossed the Rubicon in all of this. We really do have a government that perceives the utilization of information warfare technology as fair game. And totally within the pale, and attempts to justify it by these statements that one has to censor and use these technologies in order to save democracy. The argument there is, what is the democracy that they're really talking about? Because there's code words embedded within a lot of these phrases that are used. And in a very Orwellian fashion, much of this terminology has been redefined depending on what your particular political background is. So there's a case to be made that the term democracy in this context has more to do with the democracy envisioned by Mao, where it's a democracy of an elite leadership group making decisions, not a democracy of the general populace. But if you go back and listen to various communications statements when he was in office and then subsequently, for instance, his lecture at Stanford, Barack Obama has been out front in promoting this idea that we basically have to censor and propagandize in order to preserve democracy.
If someone's listening to this right now, what can they do as a prophylactic to this? I mean, I turned the television off about 12 years ago, and something told me that probably listening to that was not getting me the best information. But almost by its very nature, it's almost impossible to turn this off because, first of all, it triggers all of these fight or flight, base level emotions. Intentionally, right.
And the nudge tech is really powerful, and that's
nudge tech.
Yeah,
that's a term.
Nudge technology has been pioneered here in the UK, and your government has really pioneered its deployment for all the best reasons to advance public health, minimize smoking and other behaviors that are counterproductive and cost the NHS money, which means everybody has to pay for people's bad behaviors in terms of their personal health. And so, and Jill and I use the example in the particular chapter you're referring to of Schiphol Airport putting little labels of flies inside the men's urinal, and suddenly their cleaning bill went way down because men were aiming at the flies. I mean, nudge technology is subtle and it's everywhere. It's woven in all of the stories. It's woven in throughout the BBC. It's you can see it in Doctor Who, with the choice of gently nudging acceptance of different racial groups. I'm choosing my words, trying to choose them carefully. This has clearly been an intentional objective for good reason. For the British government to improve the familiarity and acceptance of the general population to different ethnic groups, including many of these immigrant groups that are creating enormous tensions here in London and throughout the UK. I mean, there's no question about that. And so you can make a case. Well, nudging through media in all channels has potential social benefit, but it seems like, I use the metaphor, if you give a 3-year-old a hammer, everything becomes a nail. You have these incredibly powerful psychological manipulation technologies that have been developed and deployed in part in response to 4th generation warfare, the asymmetric battleground of Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups, which the West has just done a horrible job of responding to. And so in response, where in that case it's a mixture of kinetic, psychological, religious, territory-based, but also trying to inject into a population ideas and thoughts about religious fundamentalism, etc., as a counterpoint to a Western philosophy. Well, then the West has, in the Five Eyes Alliance, has developed technology that really reaches all the way back to World War II. One of the key PSYOPs divisions in the United States military was responsible for the Ghost Army, the famous distraction technique that was used with the landing in Normandy with the inflatable tanks, et cetera, et cetera. We can all say, well, that's good stuff, right? It fooled the Germans and caused less loss of life, I guess we would say, on the beaches because we distracted them. But now that's kind of like a lot of things. Once a technology exists, you can no longer control how it's going to be deployed unless there is strong political pushback and some sort of a national consensus that no, we're not going to go there. But that, in the absence of that, and in part that's also been a product of the manipulation, is to shut down the development of that kind of consensus. Then you have a government who has this toolkit that they can use to preserve political power and to shape and craft how a population will respond and think and believe, and whether or not they will protest, and what they will protest over. What are the things that alert them? What are the things that causes them to get agitated? And that why wouldn't you use this technology to actively manipulate the population to advance your political objectives? If there are no boundaries, if there's no ethical boundaries, and this is absolutely unrestricted information warfare. There are no ethical boundaries. They will do anything. You know that from the way that this organization that you've built has been treated by the likes of YouTube, etc. You've experienced it in your daily life. The British people experience it through the Trusted News Initiative and this formerly trusted state entity that you call the British Broadcasting Corporation, that has also become weaponized as yet another propaganda arm of the state. And you find yourself here in Great Britain. I hear it all the time. I don't like this party, I don't like that party, I don't like Labor, I don't like the Conservatives. None of them seem to be responsive to us. They just respond to the elites. They have no connectivity with the common man. But there's no alternative. We can't even imagine what an alternative is. Welcome to fifth generation warfare deployed for political purposes. That's the battlefield landscape we're in, and there are no rules of engagement, unlike kinetic warfare, where outside of non-state actors, there's a general consensus about what the rules of engagement are, and those rules have made it increasingly not viable, with the notable exception of Ukraine. And in the case of Ukraine, they've justified that using very aggressive psyops and propaganda techniques to get general populace endorsement for that engagement and suppression of any alternative voices that speak about things like, as I wrote in an essay early on, just to give an example, if I had been a analyst, an intelligence analyst working for Vladimir Putin, just as a mock-up, a scenario. If I had been an intelligence analyst working for Vladimir Putin and for the Kremlin, and I saw that string of biolabs arrayed along the border, and I had just a smattering of intelligence, including the intelligence that was actually displayed on the State Department website for the State Department activities in Ukraine, in which they had the plans and a lot of the contract documents for a lot of those laboratories. I would have had to say, Mr. Putin, this is a significant threat. It's right on your border. It's a bio threat. To flip it around, can you imagine if the Mexican government built a series of biolabs along the southern border of the United States? What would be the United States response? Or if there were a series of biolabs put in place in Cuba, there's another example. What would our response have been? It would have been military. I mean, we would not tolerate that. There's no way. So this has been the Russians' assertion of whether or not it's being promoted in good faith, whether or not that's actually what their motivation was. There's no way for me to discern it. But if I was an analyst in that environment, I would be saying that this represents a significant biothreat and you better respond to it and you better neutralize it. And in fact, that's one of the first things that happened, was those labs were taken out. And I had this is hearsay. In one of the rallies that we did in Los Angeles, I had a lieutenant colonel come up to me who was actively serving at the time and said, "Robert, I need to talk to you." And of course, in this environment, you can never trust anything that anybody says. Anybody could be intelligence. Anybody could be misleading you. But he came up to me and he said, "You need to know that most of those labs were taken out by our jets, the United States jets, not by the Russian jets." I mean, those facilities, if you were sitting on the Russian side of the fence, you couldn't interpret them anything other than being a threat, I don't think. Point is that what I just said for the last 3 minutes in that little diatribe, that is completely suppressed. You cannot speak of that. It can't be written. It can't be communicated. You're immediately attacked as being a Russian agent.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.